Hi and welcome to my channel. My name is Sarah and I love to talk about books. And today I'm going to be wrapping up the books that I've read in July. I'm filming in a slightly different location today because my kids have been driving me crazy and they're finally just settling down to watch a film, so I might have bought myself maybe 5 minutes of peace. So they've taken up the living room where one of my bookcases is, and then my book trolley and everything are in this room, but unfortunately my roof has decided that it doesn't want to work anymore, so I've got a leak over in that corner, so I can't film over there either. So sorry for the boring backdrop for this video, but hopefully you won't find the books boring. I've had a really good reading month in July, but I won't be talking about the books I've read for the Booktube prize. The voting for the semi-finals closes today, and so I will talk about my reviews and rankings for that in a video next weekend. So today it's just the non-Booktube prize books that I read in July that I'm going to talk about. As ever, I'll start, well, I was going to say as ever I'll start with my favourites and work my way down, but there's not a lot of difference between particularly the first few, so just see if anything that I'm talking about takes your fancy. I'm looking quite glowy. I did have the fan on, but I've had to turn it off because of the noise. But it's really, really muggy here in Scotland today. But anyway, on to the books. The first was The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, which I think in some places is called The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart, Turton. And this has been on my radar, but I've never really been compelled to pick it up until I saw it on my library audiobook app the other week. And I thought a fun mystery might be a nice, easy read at bedtime. I was wrong. This is not an easy read. So we begin our story in the mind of this guy who has lost his memory and he's stumbling around the woods. Someone's been shot and only the name of a woman, Anna, is left in his thoughts. He makes his way to this crumbling stately home in which he is apparently a guest, and where there are many other people also staying because a party is being held by the Hardcastle family. Our confused amnesiac is left even more perplexed when this shady character in a plague doctor costume tells him that he's actually not the man whose body he is inhabiting, and that he will in fact inhabit a further 7, I think, a further 7 bodies as the same day plays out over and over again. And he has to solve the murder of Evelyn Hardcastle, who is the daughter of the family who own the house. She'll die before the day is out. If he solves the crime before those 8 iterations of the day are up, he can go free. If he doesn't, the loop just starts again. I hope that's made sense, because as I said, this really isn't an easy read. There are so many moving parts because we follow our protagonist as he relives the day over and over again, seeing it from the different perspectives and dealing with the situations that these different hosts' lives and their personalities have thrown him into, whilst also trying to solve the mystery. The guest list is extensive and everyone who's there has their own secrets and grudges, which throw up red herrings and put our protagonist into dangerous situations. And all the while he is also his life is in danger and he's trying to figure out who this plague doctor is. And then there is this woman, Anna. He knows she's important, but he doesn't know why. And I really enjoyed this book. I don't think I've ever read anything quite like it. The premise is excellent and I was gripped the whole way through, seeing our protagonist struggling against the personalities and the restrictions of certain hosts whilst trying to retain a sense of himself was really interesting. Although in that one character in particular I felt could have done with less fat shaming in the tone. You know, people can be obese without being figures of revulsion. Just saying. So that did sour it a little bit. And I think ordinarily I might have found the ending of this book a little too neatly tied up, but I did get some satisfaction in that after, you know, running the gauntlet of so many iterations and twists, and the ending itself was a complete blindsider, which I never felt was hinted at. It would be interesting to see if things are a bit more apparent on a reread, but I don't reread very often, so maybe I will never know, but still a really enjoyable, fun read. And then I went on to I Am 17 Brushes with Death by Maggie O'Farrell. This was actually my TBRtackle for June that kind of carried over into July. I can't remember what the prompt was. I will insert it here. So I have been meaning to read Maggie O'Farrell for a ridiculous amount of years without ever actually doing so, even though I own some of her books. That was until I read Hamnet for the BookTube prize last year. And I hadn't actually intended to start on her, on her works with that novel, because I know she's got an extensive back catalogue and I'm not that interested in Shakespeare, but I enjoyed it so much that it became one of my favourites of last year. This book is very different to Hamnet. It's a memoir for a start, but this is no run-of-the-mill memoir. Instead, O'Farrell has decided to structure it around the 17 times where she has come close to death. Initially, I thought that sounded a little bit overdramatic, but this book actually is anything but. Some of the brushes with death are closer than others. Some have more profound impacts, and others, they happen to those close to her rather than to Maggie O'Farrell herself. Some are really harrowing, but O'Farrell deals with them in quite a measured and insightful way. And so my two experiences of Maggie O'Farrell have made me more determined to go and dig into that back catalogue, because I think she has a stunning way with words and she can craft a story really well, whether it's based on a fleeting moment or an entire lifetime. I think what the beauty of her writing is that it's not overpowering. It's actually more kind of understated, but it builds and circles back on itself to then deliver meaning which totally knocks you down. O'Farrell gives a lot of herself in this memoir, and not just sharing the scariest moments of her life. I feel from reading this that I have got a sense of who she is as a person, and I think that's going to make reading her other works of fiction even more enjoyable. So I'm actually really glad that I read her memoir before getting too deep into her back catalogue. I also read A Corruption of Blood by Ambrose Parry. This was a NetGalley, and if you've been on my channel for any amount of time, you know I'm not a big series reader, and I don't read an awful lot of mystery or crime either, but oh my fucking god, I love the Ambrose Parry books. Look at me being spot on about how long my kids will let me have peace and quiet. There's one in the background now, so I'm hoping I can film this without him being too much of a distraction. What was I saying? I love these Ambrose Parry books. This is the third book in the Raven, Fisher and Simpson series, and potentially you could read them out of order because each of them covers a new but equally gruesome obstetric-based crime in 1800s Edinburgh. But I think to fully understand the story of Dr. Will Raven, his mentor, the eminent Dr. James Simpson, and Sarah Fisher, former housemaid with dreams of breaking out of the confines of, that were placed on women. Right, these decided to go again. It kicked my camera on the way out, so sorry if things look a bit disjointed now. And I've had to put the fan on. It is so muggy. It was just getting uncomfortable in here. So anyway, what was I saying? I do think you should read them in order, because their stories are just as compelling as the crimes that are covered in each of the books. So in this latest instalment, we have baby farming and death by poisoning with a big dose of daddy issues. Those who can't afford to raise their children, as well as the wealthy who are keen to avoid scandals of illegitimacy, acquire the services of a woman who will care for these babies or find them good homes. But is this deal as good as it sounds, or is something darker afoot? Something darker that Will Raven may find himself tangled up in, getting on the wrong side of the law in the process. I think you know the answer to that. And what about the dead rich guy poisoned by his own supper. This, well, all of these books, I just think they're so much fun. And if you have the stomach for, medical yucks and can handle a high maternal and infant mortality rate, I think you'll find them fun too. I just love the way that Old Reekie, which is a nickname for Edinburgh, is just such a part of these stories. In these books we get to see one of the old closes, which is similar to Mary King's Close, which I'll put a picture up on the screen, which was a street that was discovered under the Royal Mile, because at that point in time slums have been built on top of slums on top of slums, and so some of the action takes place in one of those closes, and I really enjoyed that. And then some of the characters and the crimes are based on real history, which I just think adds to the whole experience. I really hope this isn't the last we see in this series, because I never want it to end. Then I listened to The Girls by Emma Cline on audiobook, and this is the story of teenager Evie, who is drawn into this kind of like counterculture group when she becomes friends with a girl called Suzanne. And Evie's really drawn to Suzanne from like basically the first moment that she sees her, and it's this connection that pulls her deeper into the world of the leader of the group, Russell, and his violent vendetta against a music industry figure who has let him down. So I went into this book not really knowing anything about it, but I suspected quite early on that the story was based on like the Manson family cult and the murders that they carried out. And then when I looked at other reviews after I'd finished it, I can see that definitely is the case. I'm probably one of the only people in the world that doesn't know a lot about Charles Manson and his followers. It's one of the true crime documentaries that I haven't watched, so I can't vouch for how much of this is fact and how much of it is purely fiction. But I did find the premise of this book intriguing. I don't know why, but I've always really been fascinated by cults. And I'm also a sucker for stories about teenage girls trying to find themselves. So this story is told over 2 timelines. So we've got Evie in the 60s as it was happening, and then Evie in what I assume is the present day. And I was far more interested in 60s Evie, who is this lonely girl, and she's been left feeling like cut adrift after her parents have split up, and she has then fallen out also with her best friend. So she's feeling disconnected, she's looking for something to take her outside of her life, and she kind of develops this infatuation with Suzanne, who's an older girl and seems to be everything that Evie feels that she's not. Through Suzanne, she makes her way into this group, which they live on this like dilapidated ranch, and things quickly take her out of her depth, but something in Evie is propelled to keep kind of sticking her hand in the flame, even when things don't feel right. And present day Evie is still tethered to her past, which has seen her potential wither away. She's house sitting for her friend, kind of in between jobs, doesn't really have any purpose in life. And while she's house sitting, the friend's drug dealer's son and his young girlfriend turn up unannounced. I think Evie's able to see in the girlfriend parallels of her younger self, and so that story plays out where she's kind of, I think, trying to influence her and maybe correct some of those wrongs. Given the violence of the act committed by the group, and also there is sexual exploitation of underage girls in this book, but it's actually quite a quiet book. Evie is thoughtful to almost the point of passiveness. She's the instigator of very little of what actually happens to her. Although that's not to say she isn't observant, or that she's got lots of feelings bubbling under the surface. But even when she does act, it's usually influenced by what is going on around her rather than what she wants to do or what is best for her. And what I thought was interesting about this book was the way in which it's not actually Russell, the cult leader, who has the cult-like influence on Evie, but it's actually another teenage girl. The cult and the leader, and even the violence that they carry out, is secondary to the relationship between Evie and Suzanne. And also Evie's lack of a sense of self. And I think it raised a lot of good reflections on the nature of teenage friendships and how self-image and identity is so tied up in that. I really enjoyed the weird dynamic between the girls. It felt pretty authentic and captured that kind of toxic, dreamlike state that's somewhere between love and jealousy that can often be quite typical of friendships when you're a teenage girl. So I was quite surprised by this book. I think it exceeded my expectations. And like, I'll admit, like, sometimes the writing does feel overwrought, but there were also some, you know, really special turns of phrase. I think Cline captures the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Ennui. I don't actually think I've ever said that out loud. I think that's one of the words I've only read. I hope I'm pronouncing it. That ennui of being a teenage girl in the, you know, the lazy, empty summer, and how growing into yourself can be a really difficult transition period. And I absolutely love an author that can do that. So yeah, I enjoyed this book too. Then I had another NetGalley. This is The Origins of Iris by Beth Lewis, who also wrote a book called The Wolf Road, which I think is on my radar. But this is the story of Iris, unsurprisingly, who we meet when she is fleeing her life. She's leaving the city, her job and her marriage to disappear into the wilderness. And armed with little more than her regrets and pain from the loss of her father, from the abuse she has suffered at the hands of her wife, and from her unrealised dreams, she finds herself trying to survive in an abandoned hiker's cabin in the Catskills. So, alone with her thoughts, Iris has to face up to herself. But the metaphorical becomes physical, and she is actually joined by a seemingly happier, healthier version of herself, like a parallel world version of herself. And Iris has to examine the choices and the beliefs that have brought her to where she is in her life, before it's too late for both of the selves, as a storm is closing in and they are in danger. And I thought the premise of this book was really good. It's executed pretty well. Lewis can, she's really good at building a story by revealing things strategically, and I like the way that the full picture of Iris's past and what was going on in the cabin was built quite slowly. You don't know it all at the start. Iris is quite funny, but she's also deeply flawed, so I found myself simultaneously wanting her to escape and survive, whilst wanting her to really feel the repercussions of some of her choices. I think intimate part of violence, particularly in lesbian relationships, is something that I don't think I've heard a lot of, and it's only really recently that I've seen a light shone on it, because I've got Carmen Maria Machado's In the Dream House on my TBR, which also addresses this topic. But although Iris's story is fiction, I did find the portrayal of the escalation of the abuse and the imbalances of power quite authentic to read. I thought the situation and the reactions felt plausible, which I always think is really important in portraying, you know, any difficult topic. But what I struggled with was, and this is without spoilers, but Iris's ultimate response to the abuse, which is revealed kind of at the climax of the story. I suppose I can understand some of what Lewis's reasoning was, you know, that everyone has a breaking point and that no one is, you know, all victim or all abuser. But I found Iris wasn't always an easy person to sympathise with, and so this final reveal left me really cold and a bit pissed off. It's difficult because overall I did enjoy this book. I thought it was pretty unique in terms of the concept and the subject, but I did feel let down by Iris's final actions, because there are multiple ways that could have been played out better, I think. I also read a short story collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. So this is a collection of stories which focus on black women, their inner selves, their lives, and ostensibly, as you can tell from the title, I think they're meant to be like all women that you might see at church, but not necessarily how you would assume them to be from that fact alone, because these women are sexual, they know what they want, or more importantly probably what they don't want in their lives, and they are more than that stereotype. And I flew through this collection. I found it really cohesive and really compelling. The characters are vivid and the situations are, you know, some of them are funny, some of them are heartbreaking, and I think the spectrum of lives that are represented in these stories is really rich. What links them all is the strength of the characters. I think I'd gone into this collection expecting sex to be very much the focus, but it isn't, or, you know, it isn't always. Things like family and self-determination are also strong themes in these stories. I always struggle when I'm reviewing short story collections because I don't like to go into the individual stories, but there are definitely ones that are stuck in my mind, and this collection is definitely going to be joining my favourites because I think it's really special. And then finally I listened to White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism by Robin DiAngelo. I listened to this as an audiobook. This one of these ones, like, unfortunately, I doubt that many who would actually truly benefit from this book will ever pick it up. And even those ones from that group that do, from the reviews that I've seen, they willfully misunderstand what is being said in this book. Having said that, is this the best book about race that I've ever read? No. But it is a good contribution to the wider body of literature and knowledge and all that. What makes this one stand apart is that it is written by a white woman for white people and addresses whiteness. So if you are open to the message that DiAngelo is sending, there are some teachable moments and some incredibly difficult truths to swallow in this book. And if you don't go into it already planning to be outraged, I think you'll appreciate that DiAngelo is actually quite measured. She isn't trying to hurt anyone's feelings, and she's honest about her own racism as a balanced illustration that, you know, however much we might claim and want to be non-racist, racism is inherent in all of us. And so, as this book is by a white woman, albeit one who has researched and worked for years in the field, this book is not without its flaws. There were aspects that I didn't fully agree with or felt like a reach, but I think overall the message is still important. We live in a racist society, and so none of us can escape being racist on some level. It just is what it is. And as soon as we can start accepting that and stop putting energy into being offended when that's pointed out rather than looking for solutions, the better off everyone will be. So if you've read this and you haven't melted into a puddle of hurt feelings, I do encourage you to read books like Cast by Isabel Wilkinson. That's one of the best books on race issues that I think I've ever read. But also like How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibrahim X. Kendi. And that will kind of help you continue your personal learning and development. If you've read this and you did melt into a puddle of hurt feelings, I encourage you to put on your big purse and pants and read it again. Maybe sober. If you haven't read it, but you're just angry at its very existence, thank you for proving exactly the point of this whole book and why it needs to exist, and maybe you should go and read it too. So, made it without any other interruptions. I hope the fan hasn't made too much noise. And yeah, so as usual, let me know, have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? Do you agree or disagree with things that I've said? Have I encouraged you to pick any of them up? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, because I always love to hear them. And I will see you next week with my rankings and reviews for the BookTube semi-final in fiction. So until then, bye!